My passion is the notion of scaffolding. The theoretical perspective I'm drawing on is the social cultural theory, which look at the role of expert scaffolding. So I want to unpack that to see what that means for us and how that can help ELD learners to really reach their potential. I will be focusing on two questions today. And one is, what is the role of metalanguage? And what metalanguage is useful? Literacy is the ultimate transformative technology. Peter Freebody was the lead writer of Australian curriculum in English. Metalanguage is the tool to help us to make that transformative change in students' literacy learning. What really inspired my work is one of the concerning data that we come in constantly from the literacy NAPLAN performance data, where we see that there's a writing skill slump from year 4. In 2011 was the first time when our NAPLAN test was administered. At that year, we tested children in year 3 persuasive writing. In that year, 15.7% of students performed at advanced level for year 3. Now, in 2017, when this group reached the year 9, and we tested them again, only 4.8% of the students in that group mastered the sophisticated forms of argument. So that lack of sustained growth in writing is really concerning. And that has really motivated a lot of our work around finding the source of the problems. One piece of work I'd like to share with you today was a recently published book. It's out soon. What we looked at is what really developed across different years of schooling and what are some of the issues that we encounter in supporting students' literacy development. We all know that to become skilled writers, students will need some linguistic resources where they need to develop the control over the structures, the building blocks they need to master to be able to write. Writing's not just about production, it's about choices and control. To become effective writers requires students to be able to reflect on the choices made by others and being able to use metalinguistic resources to reflect, making deliberate choices, and then using those resources to help them to improve their writing. Writing is about choice and control, and metalinguistic resources, those understanding, will help students to be able to make those conscious choices. Writing is a quite complex act. To become writers entails developing ability to marshal and manipulate increasingly complex repertoires of genre forms and the forms that are used across different disciplinary areas. It's not just English, not just writing a narrative or story. It's about writing explanation, scientific explanation in the science and other areas. As we reach higher grades and become more sophisticated, what students need is skills that help them to make a connection to the reader. I think that's one area that's not promoted enough. And in our book, in chapter 8, what we look at some resources the students need to develop in order to build that connection with the reader, to be able to understand, to make their shared knowledge, and how can they anticipate and communicate with the reader, not just physically present in the context, but being able to anticipate more generic readers who might share some values. 2 years ago, we did analysis of a high-scoring NAPLAN text, particularly Year 9 kids. What we found is those high-performing students demonstrated stronger sense of audience awareness. And that stronger audience and awareness is manifested in the kind of details they provide, in the way that they track the relationship with the reader. That's an area, I think, that needs a lot of work in our teaching. And of course, we know writing is not just about accomplishing a task or attending a test. It's about being able to take an action, being able to act on, to take an action that matters. And I think that the sense of being able to portray a writer in a writing is a very higher level skill. And this, again, shows how complex writing is. And this is complex for all writers, and it's even challenging for our ELD learners who might come to your classroom without all of these, without this shared understanding of a genre, without having been exposed, having been read to in the early years of schooling. So how do we help to close the gap in genre and in a lot of the different areas of knowledge? We talked about students will need to develop shared understanding, cumulative understanding about language. And teachers will need to have a shared meta-language. Shared meta-language meaning not just the meta-language to talk about language, but the language that is made accessible to the learners. It's only shared when the learner understands what it means. I want you to have a look at this dialogue between a 2-year-old child and a mother. Thinking about the notion of scaffolding, I want you to think about how did the mother scaffold the child's learning, and then reflect on what are the learning points. What was the child able to do after this dialogue? So the goal was to be able to describe an animal. What the mother did was broke that goal into smaller achievable steps. What's this here? Directing the child's attention to that specific feature. So what's here? Deer. It's got antler, hasn't it? So directing attention to that part of the animal. And what's the deer doing? Drinking water. So there are 3 aspects. There's 3 steps. Deer, the antlers, different parts of the animal, and the habitat. What's the deer doing? Drinking water. What we can see, the uptake of knowledge. At 26 months, 2 months old, there is a rabbit, got long ears, he's eating carrots. What enabled the child to transfer the learning was those different components of knowledge. So now, Hale was able to recount that animal by using that structure, that scaffold that the parent provided. So what we need to do in our classroom interaction was to break your goal, your learning goal, into achievable steps for the student. What would be those steps, those essential steps students need in order to accomplish that task? And that's a challenge. Modeling is not just any form of explicit instruction. It's knowing about what steps students are required to take in order to achieve that goal, in order to accomplish that task successfully. And we need meta-language. We need to know what type of meta-language, what is entailed in that meta-language. So I'm linking here to your literacy overview. And these type of interpersonal interaction really foster a deep understanding of how different types of talk and interaction can develop academic meaning making. Answering our question, what is meta-language? It's a language for talking about language, and it helps us to build focus on oral language, and it's useful for supporting reading for learning and targeting writing for academic purposes. Australian Curriculum English defines meta-language as a cumulative body of knowledge. So it's not just about one isolated, separate knowledge, but knowledge that we develop over different years of schooling. So it's coherent, well-linked, and portable and applicable. These are the 2 keywords I would like you to really reflect on and remember as you design learning experiences for your students. How can you turn those meta-language into portable, applicable resources. Portable, that means they can transfer in innovative ways to different learning contexts. Just to summarize the key points that we discussed through that example, metalanguage is in fact scaffolding. Imagine a scaffold in a building construction site. Initially, we need that scaffold support for the learners. The crux of these concepts is then we withdraw the support we provide for the learners gradually so that students can develop their automatic control over the resources. Writing itself is a metalinguistic activity. It's an act of selecting, shaping, reflecting, and revising. And what we hope to do is to be able to develop conscious monitoring and manipulation of language. Back to the concept of scaffolding again, what the mother did was to design those questions, asking questions to bridge the gap between what the child was capable of doing at the moment and to extend their learning potential. And so challenge for all of us is to be able to design those steps, giving the students resources to bridge the gap between what they can do now and what they can do in the future. So it's extending their potential. Another example here. Hale at 26 months old, and Hale is cuddling a toy giraffe, and I saw a big giraffe. And the mother says, oh yes, what was the giraffe doing? So expanding on the activities going on at the moment. Eating leaves. What about the little giraffe? Okay, so making comparison. We talked about the big giraffes. Now, what about little giraffes? Remember what he did? Go pee-poo. Yes, he was looking out of the door, wasn't he? So that's constantly modeling, constantly extending, pushing the child to produce the language, extending that meaning potential. That's giraffe. We saw big giraffe eating leaves, little giraffe go people around the door. This is really powerful and a really strong evidence of that uptake of knowledge. So from here, what was the giraffe doing from that question to I saw big giraffe eating. So those questions become internalized as metacognitive resources that guide this child's learning. So in our teaching, we need to design these questions that can guide the students' learning. I'm going to illustrate, to expand on the idea of scaffolding by looking at two examples of ELD students' writing. Have a look at your handout, and I want you to reflect on how would you support this student to write about that piece of work I like? And what meta-language would you use? How would you scaffold? Thinking about the concept of scaffolding, how would you scaffold support these students to really improve this writing, to lift their literacy potential? What we can see if we do some analysis, the student was capable of indicating the position I like and was able to give us some reasons and was able to conclude that piece of writing with I like it because it's fish. So there are some merits in this piece of writing once we've done some analysis. An important part of our job is being able to recognize the strengths of this piece of writing and what students are able to do, and then build on that and help them to extend what they can do. If we map that piece of writing onto the ELD learning progression, very helpful to see where the students are. So the students are showing some understanding of letter-sound correspondence and very elementary awareness of purpose of genre. And the writing resembles most spoken-like. It's everyday, it's now, here and now. And vocabulary is simple, elementary use of prepositions, and some circumstantial information. But it's all right, it's basic. This is a few months later. I want you now to reflect on what developed. It's on your handout. Reflect on how would you explain the students' growth in the writing. That's how we can unpack this piece of writing. So we start with my favorite food is salmon. And there's a hierarchical knowledge, different aspects of knowledge about salmon, skin colors, cooking methods, and the tastes. I guess what we can say is this is the scaffold. And what was successfully accomplished is these students, this learner, was able to use that scaffold and apply that scaffold to that piece of writing to improve the piece of writing from text 1. So looking at what the child has achieved, what is capable of doing, we can say there's a stronger awareness of purpose, communicating what I know about salmon, not just my personal expression of my personal reaction. And there's a stronger sense of audience, and the textual cohesive emerges. And we see there's an interpersonal participant tracking emerges. In a way, there's a sense of awareness of communicating with the reader, connecting with the reader about that specific knowledge. What metalanguage is useful? Without this metalanguage, these different aspects of metalanguage, I didn't feel that we have a shared language to talk about what the student was capable of doing. Now, let's see whether these 4 aspects, these 4 areas would help enhance our talk about the metalanguage. Throughout our work, what we found was most important for the students to be able to successful in their writing was knowing the particular purpose for writing. Text 1 showing very simple list of reasons. And here going across, we have more complex exposition of arguments and the reasons. The subject matter knowledge is developing. So we have very common sense, everyday topics, drawing on the personal experience, personal knowledge, because I like salmon, because it tastes nice, whereas we have this more discipline-specific knowledge. So moving students into more technical and subject-specific fields. And there's a very little or no awareness of audience in the first text, whereas we're moving towards stronger sense of awareness of audience, the need to take into account the need of the reader. The text is shifting from more spoken type of language into more written language. Some strategies the teacher used was inquiry. An inquiry study about salmon, and read a book about salmon, and through internet research, and collecting ideas to support I like salmon through describing appearance, cooking, and the tastes. The teacher modeled the statement I like, how I like can be supported, not just I like, but you have to provide reasons to support that I like. Metalinguistic understanding was supported through this great text organizer. We call that the matrix organizer chart to help students to do the note-taking, to model the note-taking, appearance, cooking, and the taste. These are the steps we need to design and the scaffold that we need to design for the learners. So back to the concept of scaffolding. Explicit instruction only works if we could provide this type of scaffold, this type of support, different achievable smaller steps that we can design for the learners to help them. I'm designing a way to model how you introduce the meta language, the technical language, slowly. We're starting with the purpose. The purpose refers to the recognizable patterns of a text that relates to social purpose. Purpose to argue, the purpose to describe, and the purpose to discuss. Phases relates to how the text unfolds, how the different paragraphs are connected together. The field relates to the nature of a social activity. What's going on? What processes are involved, and what other details are provided. The tenor is the social relationship, and the role of the meta-language, the other semiotic resources played in the situation. In the handout, there are some purposes I would like you to identify. If you go to the last page of the handout, there's a table that summarize the different types of text types that students will have to develop or master throughout the years of schooling. So have a look in the different discipline areas. What types of the text types the students will have to achieve to undertake the task that I've noted in the table. So the curriculum topic, for example, in civics, explain how social systems work, such as systems of government. What might be the possible genre or the genres? And in English, discuss characters and events in a range of literary texts and share personal responses to these texts. In civics, what do you think students need to develop in order to read that curriculum topics or write about that curriculum topic? Yeah, system examination, explaining the components of a system and the functions and how they work together. In English, I think this table will be able to tell us that in English which types of genre they need to develop in order to do that. Could be drawing on a mix, it could be personal or review. I think it's a combination of the two. The next one is in science, classifying different electrical resources. What do you think they need to develop? Classifying reports, to classify different things into types of knowledge. And in history, considering weighing up different options, and usually that's a discussion. In geography, the impact of a drought on farming and the communities. And in PDHPE, what practical steps can our school take to address the bullying crisis among young people? Different text types, just providing the kind of language resources that will enable students to express those social purposes. Moving on, we're revisiting those concepts. I want again to give you a piece of students' writing and see what we can do to help these students. This is a recount. We're very familiar with students have done an excursion and we ask them to write a recount. That all sounds very straightforward, no mistakes, vocabulary are there. But what can we do to help students to lift their performance? We went to the forest, it was a bendy road. It took like about an hour. We all felt sick. First we ate our recess. When people started to finish their recess, they went to the toilet. After that, the teachers called all the students to get into our groups. We saw lots of birds and some cute wallabies. Lots of people nearly slipped because of the slippery moss, and everyone was looking at Miss Redmond's bite from the leech. Then we had lunch, and while we're eating, Alice saw a kangaroo, but it was time to go, but we took a photo of the class to finish off the day at Oreban. Then we went home. I had so much fun. I wish we could go there again. Straightforward, nice recount, simple language, but how can we help these students to do better? What can be improved? There's a linear sequence there. We went first, then, and then. If we were just looking at logical connectives, they are there, but something missing there. What is missing there is the connection between the concepts. What is the overarching concept? That wheel, that different 5 dimensions, provide us with very powerful language to help us to identify the strengths and the weaknesses of the students' writing. So we could look at what is the purpose of students' writing? Is the writer clear about the purpose? What stages does the text move through? Has each stage been developed effectively? If we look at the purposes, the purpose was clear. We have recounts, we have way, when, where, and we have record of event 1, record of event 2, record of event 3, and we have concluding about, I had so much fun, I wish we could go there again. So it's very spontaneous expression of personal feelings and opinions. When we look at the phases, we could ask questions about how well organized the sequence of the text and do events unfold in logical ways. What we noticed, there was these simple connectives and, First, after that, then, and why, but, then. So very simple connectives that were used to connect the ideas. Now, this student was able to compose coherent, it is coherent, but simple sentences to express an idea or event and makes connection between the ideas. The questions we could ask to help students was, has the field been sufficiently developed? And I think we agree it has not. That's where the area that we can work on. Is the student using the most appropriate, effective vocabulary? Does the student need to be introduced to more specific terms? And how well has the students been used those resources to represent what's going on, who is involved, and other circumstantial details? So if we look at the fields, the nature of social activity, we see all these way, these red-colored, the color-coded way. First, way 8, when people, the teachers, the students, weigh lots of birds, some cute wallabies. They were things that present. It all consists of human entities, way, things that were here and now that we can see. When we look at what is going on, the verbs really shed light on the cognitive process going on in the writer's mind. What we see here was very much material process, that physical action. So we ate, started to finish, we went, called, saw. A saw was a sensing verb, and looking at. Ate, eating, saw. So the process again shows us very much concrete physical activities, showing here and now. The circumstantial information is a great resource to help students to expand their meaning, what's happening and where the event happens. So we went to the rainforest. It took about an idea. First, when people started to the toilet, began because of the slippery, from the ledge, then. And ideas are moving from going to the forest, eating our very linear sequence of events. So that development resembles very much early language development that demonstrates students has a small range of text types with their basic structures and was able to dealing with everyday individual and concrete non-specialized subject matter and producing very face-to-face, very logical, dialogic, spontaneous, context-dependent language and relatively limited range of roles. Now, if students stuck here, the language is straightforward, simple, they will not be able to succeed to complete the sophisticated writing tasks that they are required in higher school years. This is a few months later. Have a read of this piece of writing. What was this student capable of writing now after a few months? And this text is in your handout. So maybe if we use the powerful meta-language that we shared with you, those 5 dimensions, looking at the purpose, let's look at the purpose. What is the purpose of students' text? Well, the purpose of that excursion is on the knowledge about the rainforest, to understand the rainforest. And now the purpose much clearer. We have last Thursday, as we walk through the rainforest, firstly, after that, finally. Most often we teach students connectives. We say use firstly, secondly, thirdly. We know now those are important, but what is most important is the internal relation between the concepts, not just those external references. Beyond that, we can see now we have a shifting of a location, not just that linear time sequence. We can see the shift. I went to the rainforest, and then we see the first layer, the forest floor, the understory, in the canopy, and above the canopy. And that just shows the sense of a creativity and the thinking process that went on. And the structure, the connection is a hierarchical. We have rainforests, and then we show the different parts of a rainforest. And that really shows the knowledge and the connection between different components of knowledge. So we would say, when you see that this piece of writing, you would say, yes, that achieved the purpose, because the purpose was to communicate the field knowledge, what they've learned about that particular topic. By looking at the connecting of the ideas, if you look at the phases, it unfolds from forest floor to understory, canopy, emergent. That's really very clever way of connecting the knowledge. Looking at the field-specific knowledge, has the field been sufficiently developed and researched? By looking at the different participants, or what is going on, the description of what is going on, we could see that all this knowledge is relevant. There's a controlling idea, forest floor. We looked at forest floors, and there we can see small birds, small animals, leaf litter, bugs, moss, fungi, young saplings. That's what we can see within that forest floor. Very relevant and showing what we can see, what we can observe there. We enter down the story, temperature become cooler. That's how I was experiencing. So you can feel that the writer was imagining for the reader. Imaginative writing is not making up the story. It's about imagining the details for the reader so the reader can imagine with the writer. That's what we call the imaginative writing. So understory, temperature, little sunlight, and moist. And that's very much based on the knowledge and the writer's experience. And in the canopy, so we enter in a different layer of forest. In the canopy, we saw small birds, and we can hear the sound of the bellbirds and the frogs. So the different senses was involved. The writer now became a reflector, not just an observer, not just a person who writes about the very spontaneous personal feelings. Above the canopy, we could see the tops of emergent. Again, we see those connection between different knowledge ideas, the connection of the knowledge structure, the relationship between the different parts of the knowledge. And that's what helps expands the learner's meaning-making potential. If we look at the processes, the verbs that are used, and they're increasingly more sensing verbs that indicate that cognitive process, the reflective process. And the circumstantial details are expanding, where the sun shines after that in the canopies, above the canopy. This field-specific knowledge really shows a greater level of specificity. And to become a skilled writer is to expand the students' resources to be more specific. Looking at the interpersonal relationship, we show a stronger sense of audience, and the language become more reflective and more written-like. By looking at that shift from simple accounts of personal experience to more complex recounts with events organized around chronological circumstantial sequence, the knowledge of topics expand from very everyday commonplace topics to more discipline-specific knowledge. And little or no audience into a stronger sense of audience. Spoken-like language into more written-like. The challenge for all of us is help students to make the shift from here to more sophisticated control of language in these 4 different aspects of metalanguage. To summarize what we have developed throughout this workshop, the students were supported. The novice is shown how, what to do, and is helped to do with those little steps. Students' efforts and attention are directed to target language use. Thinking is made visible, an important aspect of apprenticeship, making those steps visible. What the teacher did was really moving the students from that everyday sense of knowledge into more specific technical fields through task-based group work, guided note-taking, researching, modeling of recount, joint construction, and then finally in the last draft of their writing. So that's an example of guided note-taking, giving them the scaffold, the different areas of knowledge, different dimensions of knowledge that you expect the students to develop. Now, this is a framework that we use in our teacher training to help students to plan for an integrated language-focused learning. And we ask our students to start in the middle, identify opportunities for language to be modeled, and then plan activities for learning to use language. What we need to start is first to identify language that is central to the particular topic area, finding about where the students are at, what our students are capable of doing, and choose the key language on which you would like to focus on. For planning, we need to be clear about different purposes for which our students need to use language, and make those metalinguistic choices conscious as students transfer learning in innovative ways to new contexts. In our teaching, we set high expectations. If we want to set high expectations of students, we need to provide high support. And we do this by planning for deep cumulative learning over time. And the students' metalinguistic understanding is scaffolded by the teacher through such activities as modeling the genre and the meta talk. So I hope that you will be able to design smaller steps to help extend students' learning potential.